I'm going to read this because this is profound. It says, fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problems and help others. To finish that sentence, that just sounds like a beautiful relationship no matter what place it is or for what reason. But this is Alcoholics Anonymous, Reasons for Existence. And it's to help others to recover from alcoholism. And so today, I'm very thankful, Jennifer, that you've made time to talk with Spotlight on the Spirit listeners about AA, a little bit about the fellowship. What is AA? And maybe we'll just get into hopefully a little bit of maybe on how it's impacted you over the years and how you see it. And so what I'd like to do first off is just you are a Minnesota Department Legionnaire. And what post are you from?
I'm currently in post 406, which is Christie to Park in St. Paul.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship, how it began with AA?
Well, I worked as an emergency medical technician back in the late 80s.
Uh-huh.
And what happened was, I got injured on the job, and that pushed me into having issues with pills. And, you know, as we say in early recovery, there's no pill that alcohol doesn't make work better. So, and people in emergency services work hard,
Yeah.
but and I should say this because it's been a long time, but we partied as hard as we worked.
Yeah.
So there is that quotient to it. I was 18 years old, 19 years old. So I was busy finding out who I was and
Right.
going into a field where you work hard and party harder really tends to guide your track. It's kind of like going into school, going to college and into a sorority or whatever, and
Right.
everybody around you drinks. The odds are you're going to
Yep.
try it.
Yep.
And so,
I
you
had a
know,
first sergeant that was his motto.
hmm
People loved him. He
hmm
says, "We work hard, we play harder."
yep,
And
absolutely.
oh, definitely. And so I think they did. I think they enjoyed the playing, but they also worked hard. And so
Well,
you, mhm,
and in emergency services, you see a lot. You have to do a lot of things that really start, especially, in your late teens, early 20s, that really start to shape who you are by the things you see. And,
yeah,
you know, we talk about it in the Legion about PTSD and what our soldiers and airmen and everybody see in all the five branches talk about. Um, I talked about this with somebody earlier that, you know, over the course of a tour, if it's 18 months, I was in emergency services 10 years. And I started in New York City, in the Bronx, and Manhattan, and then volunteered and did a lot of stuff. So over the course of 10 years, I saw a lot of things that normal people, thank God, don't have to see or experience. So that starts to shape your psyche too, and what you're going to do to learn how to cope with those things that you see or that you have to do or you experience. And
right,
unfortunately, drugs and alcohol are, um, if you're not careful, they become a solution.
right.
And they're never really a good solution, but at the time they feel like a solution.
Well, they kind of help you kick the can down the road a little bit too when you're dealing with these big
Mhm.
issues that you have no place to put them in your mind at the time.
Yep. You haven't learned to compartmentalize your experiences yet and put them, in a dark closet somewhere. Or I think you and I were earlier talking about, and this is going to date me, but Mork and Mindy, Mork
Yeah.
had an episode where he had, if anybody knows Mork from Ork, you know that he had all his emotions behind this door. And
Uh-huh.
one episode, somebody accidentally unlocked the door just a little, and all his emotions just flew out of him, and it was a thing. And so, you know, that's kind of like if you don't have those coping mechanisms and you don't have that closet or that room you could put that stuff until you're ready to deal with it. It's out there, it's all over, and it really has quite the adverse effect on your life and people around you for that matter.
Yeah. The unique thing about alcohol is it's a biological disease. I mean, it hits all those pleasure receptors,
Mhm.
but it's an all-encompassing issue because people normally start drinking, well, because they're enjoying themselves, or they'll start drinking because it's a coping mechanism for whatever reason. But then all those little pleasure receptors are just clicking biologically, and then you find yourself caught, if you
Mhm.
will, right?
Well, and a lot of it too is that if you start drinking or doing drugs early enough, it really arrests your psychological and emotional development, right? So,
Yeah,
as much as we say, 18, you can join the military, you can fight for your country. We also say that we want you to join the military early because our armed forces shape you into the machine they need you to be to do the things that
yeah,
they need to do to keep our nation safe. But the same holds true with emergency services. So if you start off at 17, 18 years old and you start to see these things and you use bad coping mechanisms and you arrest your development, you know, as much as teenagers would like to say, I want to be 18 forever, I am not 18 anymore and I wouldn't go back to being 18 again if you paid me.
right. Me either. I'm so glad we didn't have Facebook.
Yeah, me too.
You had to turn your roll of camera film into the developer.
Right. Or yet, I'm so glad our phones back
Yes,
then, like we had pagers instead of phones.
yeah,
How much trouble would we be in if back then we had these?
right. We
I,
put all the failures and then have to put a screen on it or a filter on it.
the
Um,
damage and the rebuilding would be more ginormous, I think.
totally. Um, I was in one of my clinical pastoral education units. I did in the outpatient drug and alcohol rehab. Um, and so they were the people that were there, they were really trying to get their minds wrapped around how they got where they were because nobody planned on being in a drug rehab.
Right. Yeah,
There was,
nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, "Oh, you know what? My life is perfect. So the only thing I don't have is I want
yeah,
to be a drug addict and an alcoholic and I want to have to go to treatment and I want to spend lots of money on that big hospital bills and all that." So nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Gee, yeah, my life is perfect. Let me screw it up." It's really not how it happens.
no, but it does. Um, you know AA more than I do. I appreciated it. I learned about it first when I was at the clinical pastoral education class, and the beauty of AA, one of the components of any kind of addiction or trouble really is what are you going to do with where you're at? And a lot of it has to do with this pain and suffering piece, which all religions, no matter what, address human pain and suffering, that foundation for it. AA is not religious, but it takes note of how human suffering um, interacts with the drug or the alcohol issue, doesn't it?
Well, and for AA, we talk about as much as the big book says talks about God. It's your understanding of your higher power. It was important for me at the beginning that because I didn't have a big heavy duty church background.
Mhm.
I mean, I went to Sunday school when I was little because we lived across the street from a church
Uh-huh.
and I was aware of God. I was, aware,
Right.
but I was pretty much agnostic. I kind of knew God was out there, but I didn't care what He did or what He told me I was supposed to do. You
Right.
know, I, and a part of my addiction, I really working in EMS. I'm sure there were times where I believed I was God. So,
Yeah.
you get a little off the rails with that, and I liked AA when I first came into it, even though I was tremendously broken, was that I was allowed to choose a power greater than myself. And we
Mm.
tell silly stories in AA about sometimes a power greater than yourself is the local police because they certainly have more power than you do. Or we
Right.
tell stories like, okay, if you think that you're all powerful, go out on the corner, take all your clothes off, jump up and down, see what happens. You won't be all that all powerful then.
Uh-huh.
Law enforcement will come and take you away because you're jumping up and down on the corner with no clothes on. So, there's lots of things we talk about to get people who have a God complex or, you know, don't have a center, because that's if you don't have any. For me, when I didn't have any spirituality, I didn't have a center. So I
Mm.
was all over the map all the time.
Right.
What I believed, what I didn't believe, based on what benefited me at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was helpful in me for somebody to say, look, you need to pick a higher power. I don't care who it is or what it is. It could be a doorknob right now. But you need to understand that, the world doesn't swim around you and you are not all powerful. That's probably where it starts.
You use the word power more than once.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably the start of all of us, especially between 18 to 24 years of age, who's in charge of me, right?
Right, right.
Who's in charge of me, and alcohol can be in charge of people.
Well, and I don't think that people realize it. I think one of the big problems with alcohol and drug addiction is you don't realize you're out of control until it's too late.
Right.
There's no big sign at the end of a detour where the bridge is out. There's big signs and warning signs. There really isn't. I mean, sometimes there are for our relatives and they see stuff,
Hmm.
but when we're deep in it, we don't see any of that.
No.
It's not something that happens. You don't see it before it happens, and then before you know it, that switch is flicked, and you can't unflick the switch. Once it's flicked, you're just dealing with
Yeah.
the totality of it all, I guess.
Yep. Um, I I can relate to it because I smoked cigarettes very early. When I was a teenager, I started smoking, and I didn't really realize how it affected me or that I was addicted. And
Hmm.
then all of a sudden, one day, I realized I was addicted, that it controlled what I did.
Hmm.
And it took me quite a few years for that addiction to no longer dictate. So I remember it, and it was a troubling time. And I think AA, and that might be one of the reasons why I can appreciate AA so much, is because I can empathize with being out of control.
Hmm.
And you just live your life thinking that you're in control, and then all of a sudden there's something chemical that is making decisions about when you're going to do things and why you're going to do things and who you're going to associate with, who you're not going to associate with.
you know I mean, it's not like with drugs and alcohol. It's more like, did you get behind the wheel? Did you get a DUI? Did you do things you wouldn't have normally done if you weren't under the influence? Um would I'm talking about smoking. Would
Yeah.
you stand out and shiver for 10, 15 minutes in minus 40-degree weather if you could just walk away from smoking?
Well, I did that when I was in the military too, and stand in line in formation.
Well, but
So it
but the military was a power greater than ourselves at the time.
definitely was, and its goal wasn't to ruin me. It's not religion, but it understands the place of spirituality. It said that anonymity is its spiritual foundation, which was a little perplexing to me. Is like anonymity is your spiritual foundation. So it recognizes what I got out of it is it recognizes that your addiction is yours to own. You have people that will help you and hold you accountable, but it really is your transformation.
Well, and early on, it had a lot to do with, I mean, everybody talks about alcohol and drug addiction now, and there's
Mm.
a certain amount of shame and whatever into it. But
Okay.
back in the day, there was even more tremendous amounts because, in the beginnings of AA, there wasn't, they just called it some type of illness. And it was very, you were not a good person. You were just weak and you were all these things. I think now we've developed to the point, not completely, mind you, because there are some people out there who just don't understand the whole addiction dynamic, whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or whatever, or food or whatever. But back then, in order to have this organization, we had to be anonymous just so that we could recover, because we had people, businessmen and bankers and big people like that in the community, who wouldn't have been able to continue working while
Sure.
continuing an effort to get well. So that's initially where that came from, for my understanding over a lot of years of this program, is that it guards the people who are trying to get sober, quite frankly, from the outside world, who will judge. And we are more than good enough at judging ourselves at this point. We
Oh.
really don't need the added stressor of somebody who doesn't understand what we're doing or what we're trying to get better with.
Mm.
Um, that's predominantly why people in recovery don't do what I'm doing with you.
Yeah.
Um, because and AA wants to keep their name pretty much out of publicity like that. In other words, one of the big things is, okay, I'm talking to you a bit about being 28 years sober. And what if tomorrow I go out, crash my car, kill a family, and I'm under drugs? And now you've got this podcast of me talking about how great AA is. Well, if it was so great, how come she did that?
Right.
So there's that whole thing there. But
Yeah. The 12 steps, are most of them, 9 of them are really individual
mhm.
personal development,
Yep.
recognizing that you might not have be a god,
Yeah.
or in power, a higher power. You have other powers.
Mhm.
And then there's also interaction with other people. The whole process to me looks very vulnerable.
It is. You have to, and I think the founders did a really great job putting. We always say they put the steps in order for a reason. They're numbered for a reason. You can't go from hi, I'm Jennifer, I'm an alcoholic, to the ninth step of I want to make amends, because it's a program of development. You take each step and it puts you in a position to take the next step, which puts you in a position to take the next step. Early in sobriety, I tried to go from 1 to 9. And what I did was I started making amends badly, which just adds amends to your amends, you know. If you go up to somebody and say, I'm sorry that you were a jerk when I was drinking. Well, now,
Right?
now you got to put that on the bottom of your list again. Go, oh, well, I'm going to have to apologize for that, because I probably shouldn't have put it quite that way. This is supposed to be about my behavior, not about your. So,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and that's why, the steps are in order for a
Yeah.
reason. You don't leap over them,
Yeah.
um,
Because
because it can get a little sticky.
yeah, if only you would have been a better human being, I could have been a better human being.
That's exactly it. And at this point in my life, I'm the human being I need to be, quite honestly, for me. And I'm always a work in progress. And
Yeah.
sometimes you're not going to like the human I am.
Right. Exactly. And that's okay, because
That's
I get to determine if I like it or not, and
yeah.
I don't need to share it with you. It's hard. Number one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and you could say I admitted that I was powerless over anything.
Mhm.
You know, um, I think that's the beauty of it, is all 12 steps really are human nature,
Oh,
really,
sure.
to a degree. They're germane, I guess, would be to humans.
I think, you know what, and we always say in recovery, we say, God, I wish normal people would follow these steps. you know, Normal being a dryer setting and all, but we really wish that some of the normal humans swirling around us
Yep.
might read this book and use its benefits to their good. I mean, and eventually I'm sure you're going to touch on the 12 traditions, which are how the organization works and and stays from, you put a bunch of alcoholics in a room, it's
Hmm.
kind of like being at high school again. Okay, at least half the room is probably not past step 2. And so they had to come up with a set of 12 traditions that would help us to operate while we're attempting to work this program. And so it has its own book. It's called The 12 Traditions.
Love
Um,
it.
yep. And it's really awesome because it really keeps the organization going while we're sick in our disease and we can continue to help others.
Kind of
But,
like Robert's rules of orders for meetings, but for,
yes, exactly. You know what? That's a really good example. And I also think that, you and I are both work in the nonprofit sector, and I really wish and I've thought about it a lot, is taking the 12 traditions and adopting them for overall general organization consumption,
yeah.
um, because they really help us not tear each other apart when we're trying to get a handle on things that are swirling around us.
Yep. It's so true. Humans, the word freedom doesn't excuse you from interactions that we both agree upon.
Right.
And I think sometimes early on, I would get confused. I can do whatever I want. Well, sure, I can do whatever I want, but there's consequences for everything. It's just, are
Yep.
they positive or negative consequences?
Hmm.
Consequences, to a large degree, are never gray. They're always for you or against you.
Hmm.
And I think for those that realize that alcohol or drugs or cigarettes are
or
not for
or
them,
or gambling or food addictions, any addiction has
yeah,
an adverse anything that takes over your life and puts everything aside for that is a problem. And it doesn't matter what category it is. I mean,
yeah,
if you like plants too much, okay, and you have too much plants in your house that you can't sleep in your own bed, one would say it's a plant addiction.
yeah, plantaholic,
Plantaholism.
workaholic, sexaholic. There's all these aholics now.
There's so many isms I can't get my head around.
There is. There is. And yes, the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon unity. Um, and that's so easy to put in a sentence, and humans get involved in the mix, right?
Hmm.
And so what AA does, I like that AA is private. You know, when you're being vulnerable and having to trust the group, knowing who your inner circle is, the inner circle of sanctum, because not everyone is capable of handling somebody's vulnerability
True.
or progress or transition. That's why we have filters. Not everybody can handle it. And some people are not able to reflect long enough to empathize that they might be there. So always appreciated that, as it kind of teaches us how to be community, because that can be difficult, right?
It also helps us as a sponsor of somebody who's working through their stuff when you get to that point in your sobriety where you can do
Mm.
that. It also helps you. For us, it reminds us of where we've been, because the
Oh,
second we forget where we've been,
uh-huh.
we're liable to end up there again. Um, and it's funny because early on, I was like, AA was my world. In order to survive, in order to exist, I
Uh-huh.
was at meetings 3, 4 times a day. Just to get through a 24-hour period. And I was in a place where, and Minnesota is famous because in the recovery world called 10,000 lakes and 8,000 treatment centers. For all the 8,000 treatment centers, there are multiple AA meetings in any community. You can't shake a stick and not find AA meetings. Um, so it's really helpful to be surrounded with people who understand what you're going through, but
Mhm.
who will also hold you accountable on your stuff. There's a
The
lot.
accountability piece. AA does it uniquely because dignity's in the sharing,
Hmm.
but they'll call you out.
Oh yeah, if you have a good sponsor, that's your sponsor's job to call you out. Say, okay, I call BS. That's not true, Jennifer. This is what really happened. And, they help you with the steps because they've experienced the steps. They
Right.
help you maintain honesty in yourself. And they teach you to trust others,
Mm.
which that I'm not all that great at. But in grand scheme of things, I am better at it than I've ever been. Let's go with that.
Yeah. We're all human. Sometimes I think we forget that.
That's true. Sometimes we hold people to a higher standard and then we forget to tell them what that standard is. And then we get upset when they disappoint our expectations, the expectations we never told them we had for them. Yeah, it's a problem.
It definitely is. I used to hold a lot of people to a high standards, Christians, because I was not raised in a Christian setting.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, when I came into the Christian family, if you will, um, that standard was very high because the things I would read about black and white, it's either
Mhm.
or, and they were always failing miserably. But I never told them. So all of our interactions were tainted
Yep.
with my frustration of them failing me, of how I perceived that things should be.
Well,
So,
and I have to tell people what my expectations are. That doesn't necessarily require them to live up to them, but
yep.
at least they're forewarned that this is my expectation. I do or don't do the following things. Um, and in recovery, in order to safeguard your own recovery, you have to tell the people you're around, especially when we're talking about veterans, because veterans are like EMS people. They work hard, they
Yeah.
party just as hard. And so, in order to safeguard my sobriety and my health and my life, because for me, drinking and using means death. You know, it may not happen tomorrow, but if I go back again, it will happen eventually. And the older I get, the more likely it is that I won't survive it. I have to tell people that, what, I'm sober. That doesn't preclude you from doing what you're doing. Have at it. But for me, I can't do that. And I'm chronic. I look at people and say, you know what? Honestly, I don't drink for your safety. Or things like, I don't have time to drink because when I drink, I break out in handcuffs. There
Mm.
are things that you say that, deflect people from Jennifer, you want a beer, Jennifer, you want a cocktail, because we're in that stratosphere. Um,
Oh,
and so you have to learn how to um, brush
deflect
them
it.
off.
Yep.
Um,
How to deflect it with humor.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. At this point in my sobriety, I don't care who knows. All my skeletons are out of the closet. I don't have any hidden anywhere. So I'm pretty open about who I am, but not all people are at that point yet.
Yeah, agency, human agency, being responsible for you, recognizing you're not responsible for anybody, making up your own mind is something that it sounds like you really had to work through. Like,
Mhm.
where are my boundaries, where are theirs? And then there's a relationship of determining where you're going to meet in the middle, you know.
Well,
Um,
and you even have to safeguard yourselves from people who are working the program too, because even as a sponsor of somebody, at a
uh,
certain point, I have to safeguard my mental health and my sobriety.
yeah.
So if they're so off the rails, I would never allow, and this is going to really sound selfish, but it is what it is. At a certain point, if somebody is, I don't know how to say this most sensitively, I safeguard me. So if you're not working the steps and you're doing bad behavior, you're not going to drag me in with it. You're just not
And
going to do it.
in the counseling world, they call that you're never working harder than your counseling.
Well, exactly. And I can't do, I am not willing to throw, and again, this is very selfish. I am not willing to throw away my health and sobriety to rescue somebody. I wouldn't jump in a lake without a life jacket on to save somebody. So I'm certainly not going to jump back into the pool of addiction without safeguarding mine.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really had to deal with your martyr complex.
Yes, my burning desire to fix everything and everybody. Yes.
Right. You had to, what are the limits to that,
Yep.
you know, and rein it
Oh,
in.
and I had to deal with that working with EMS too. Early on, you have to learn that you cannot save everybody. People are going to die, and there's not a lot you can do about certain situations. And
Yeah.
so for me, God seems to be teaching me that constantly. Jennifer, you can't fix everybody. I know you really want to fix everybody, but at a certain
Right.
point, you have to cut your losses and say, okay, maybe somebody else could better do this, or as an EMT, maybe I need to call the paramedics or whatever that is. You have
Mhm.
to get your head around it. I'm not always good at it, Kelley. I want to fix everything. I look at things and go, why is this broken? This is so easy to fix. But if the
You're
people surrounding it aren't willing to fix it, you just have to go, okay.
It sounds like to me, Jennifer, because I know you, we've had a relationship for quite a few years. You're very good at fixing things. You're analytically, you can assess a situation really quickly. There's really not a lot of emotion attached to it. Just like this is what needs to happen. A plus B plus C will equal D. If you go A plus B and add a C and a half in there, you're not going to get your D. So it sounds like you really kind of have to like, okay, my personality and to really assess if who you are is best in that situation too.
Here's what you need to do. What I always have to practice doing is understanding, especially in the work I'm doing right now, is that I have to remember not everybody knows the things I know.
Where in the AA program did this kind of develop into of did the teaching, you being the teacher, you being the fixer, were they always stumbling blocks when you're reaching towards sobriety and wanted to get there, or did they help you?
My the first 5 years of my sobriety was tough
Was
because
it?
I was still very me,
Mm.
and in that I wasn't really good at people telling me what to do. I really thought that I didn't need anybody's help. And if I just, because at a certain point, and I don't know that I can do it now, like I could recite to you how it works out of this book without reading it. And that impresses people in meetings, and you tend to get people who want you to help them, but it didn't really generate right away into me completely understanding because there's a difference between remembering something and understanding something.
Right.
And so my first 5 years, and I was dealing with getting sober, I was dealing with mental health issues, and all that encompasses because you can't take the drugs and alcohol away, because they are a temporary solution to a bigger problem.
Hmm.
I didn't wake up at 18 and go, yeah, I want to be a drunk. I mean, I had issues before that
Hmm.
that I clearly didn't deal with. And then when I found drugs and alcohol, it was the solution in that moment. So you strip away all the chemical things that you're doing to what you think is dealing with your issues. You strip all those coping mechanisms away. And now you have that raw person with the same problems, only it's 5 years later, and you wonder how you got there.
Right.
So,
It's
it,
hard to be raw in public.
right. How do you interact with humans who you don't basically like because you don't like yourself enough to like anybody else? And
Mhm.
so, you know, part of recovery is not just stopping drinking, it's learning to live life on life's terms. And look, life is messy, okay? And even there's no such thing as a perfect world, even in this country where we're pretty close to amazing. We
Yeah.
still have issues and we still have to interact with humans we won't necessarily like. And how do you do that when all your coping mechanisms have been ripped away and you're like a one gigantic raw nerve and everyone is standing on it all the time?
All the time. So you had to come up with different coping mechanisms.
Well, yes, and the steps help you get coping mechanisms. And then of course you see counseling, right? How to deal with your depression, How do you deal with your anxiety? It probably wasn't until 7 or 8 years into it that I realized things like my ADHD, and all those other things, my learning disabilities, which probably started this whole factory mechanism. Didn't I read right well enough? Didn't I understand what I was reading? I struggled in school. All those things. If you
Hmm.
don't have coping mechanisms as you grow up, you don't cope with them. You
Yeah, because
just
the questions get bigger, they get louder, they
and
just keep
and
going.
more complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, and they just keep coming back and kicking you a little bit.
Every time you think you've got both feet on the ground, somebody kicks you in the head and goes, "Oh, well, maybe not so much."
Maybe not so much. And then you're going to listen to that and you're like, yeah, right.
And if you don't have, for me, if you don't have the programming, you don't have the steps, and you don't have a conscious contact with God, and you can't pray, and there's nothing to do, and you have no control. I mean, the only control I have is my ability to hit my knees and pray that I don't know. I don't punch somebody in the throat. I've talked about that. You know, so instead to do that, I look up and say, "Okay, God, a little help here." I don't know what the help looks like because I'm just in this moment. I am that lost. So just please help me not to do more damage in this moment.
Yeah.
And that's worked for all these years. I haven't had to go to jail for punching people in the throat.
Which is a mature prayer, you know.
And I try not to tell God what to do. Okay. Really early on, not, they say ask God for help, but then don't tell God how to help you, right? God is God. Okay. Your higher power is your higher power.
Yeah.
They will help you in the way they think best works.
Yeah.
And as an alcoholic and an addict, I don't always know the best way that works. So I say, God will help here. And then I sit still for a second and hope beyond all hope and have faith that they will put people, places, and things in my path that help me deal with whatever I'm going through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And faith is a huge word in recovery. If you have faith in nothing, why would you get sober? If you don't have faith that your life can get better, why would you try?
Well, there you go.
Whatever you want to call it, faith in, I don't know, a tree, a bush, a TV show, whatever it is, you need to, you got to find it, because I could have never gotten and stayed sober. And believe me, over the last 28 years, I've dealt with some issues around people, places, and things
Hmm.
that if I didn't have faith, and for me is God, if I didn't have faith in God, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you like this. I'd either be dead or in jail, because
You to check
that's
out.
how it works.
Yeah. Something that you are talking about that I don't want it to lose sight of, is problems don't go away.
Nope.
Perfection is not attainable.
Nope.
Um, you mentioned depression, anxiety, ADHD. Those don't go away.
Coping mechanisms.
Coping mechanism, what do you do with them? What place do they have in your life? Probably has fluctuated, but then it's really learning to live with them.
Well, it's, for me, it's kind of, ADHD can be a benefit and a problem.
Hmm.
Now, the
Sure.
problem is you get fixated on something and all the things are swirling around you, you're not paying attention.
Right.
However, if you're focused on something and you're really focused on it, you do it really well.
Hmm.
For me, my ADHD is I have to keep it. It's a balance, right? Um, if I go on a tangent for 3 days and I do too much Legion stuff, by the weekend I'm so spent I can't even open my computer,
Right.
and that runs the risk of me getting into depression. Why am I doing this? How it's so hard? That whole psychological cycle. Oh my God, somebody doesn't like me. They called me and they complained, and they didn't
Right.
like what I gave them or what answer I gave them. And so you have to it's like a teeter totter. When we were kids, it was great. Each kid sat on the end, and if you could balance in the middle, that was the greatest thing, right? Going up and down was great and exciting, but if you and your partner could get on that seesaw and go, all both our feet are off the ground and we're
Yeah, right in the middle.
chilling. Hmm.
In the middle. I think I've been learning more in life. There's so many things in life, especially with your gift, like, or, ADHD might not have been a gift to you, but it is a gift, or it can be,
Right.
but it's something that you have. So there is a strong good to it and a strong bad. A lot of times your best gift, or your superpowers, if you will, are also the things that'll mess you up.
That is true. That is very, very true. Being overly dedicated to anything,
Mhm.
being too invested in something is really good in that you'll probably do a really great job, but at a certain point, you'll get really burned out.
Yep.
So again, we're back to that teeter totter where you have to find a happy medium
Yep.
where, you know, you don't do something so much that you start to hate it. You
Right.
know, it's
Yep.
it's kind of I likened it to like when your family member's sick, you have to take care of them, and they're in hospice and all this stuff. One of the reasons respite care is so important for the caregiver is because you don't want to take care of your parents so much all the time to the point where you start to resent them, and when they go, that's the only thing you think about. It's the
Yep.
same
Yep.
for me. It isn't.
I think we're hardwired for more of a balance. Um,
Some of us are, some of us are not.
well, our bodies still need to rest, and the cells somehow need sleep.
Yep.
So biologically, we're hardwired to recharge and rejuvenate and to keep going over the long haul.
Hmm.
And sometimes we'll get caught up in thinking that we can defy those biological laws. Yeah.
And now we're back to talking about having a God complex. I know
Yeah.
what I can handle. Don't tell me what I can handle. I'll let you know when I'm done. And I've had to be mindful of people who say, Jennifer, you look tired. And not thinking that they hate me and I'm ugly, but geez, somebody's noticed I'm exhausted. Maybe I need to sit down.
Right.
You know.
Right. I learned early on, tell me more.
Mhm.
That's the question. How do you have an open mind about what they're telling me? And then sifting, if is it accurate? Is it helpful information? Where did they get it from? Are they telling me that because they have a problem and they just want to
Right.
bring me down? Um, Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So it sounds like you've gone through that process.
Mhm.
It doesn't sound like that would be something that you can say check done, because we don't get rid of our shortcomings.
Well, and these steps are meant to be done frequently. You don't do them once,
No.
right? And
Right.
everything is fixed. You do them throughout the course of your life.
Oh,
So, when you jump down to step 10, where it talks about taking an inventory at the
yes.
end of each day, that's when you start to jump up and say, okay, how could I have been better today? Did I yell at somebody? Did I,
Yeah.
slap somebody? Did I run a red light and cause there's extremes to that, right? Was I just unkind to somebody? And so you look over you analyze your behavior that day and say, okay, God, um, do I have to apologize to Kelley because I was just rude on the phone?
Sure.
Should I not eat a pint and a half ice cream tomorrow? It varies. And so you look at that and say, okay, my shortcomings is, when I'm tired, I'm short and abrupt on the phone. And maybe after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I need to let my voicemail take it so that I can think about what they're asking and not jump at them and maybe answer their question better. So for me, it's supposed to be a daily reminder of how do I look back on my day, um, and sometimes I'm good at that, and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it takes a couple weeks, and people look around me and go, "Jennifer, you are
Right.
not a happy person. What's going on?" And then you start to look back on it and say, "Oh, well, maybe I should have said that better," or
Personal development, you're always developing.
Mhm.
Skills, you're usually always increasing on.
Hopefully.
This isn't a once and done thing. This
So,
is something that you can get ingrained into you, and
It's a course of behavior that you continue to do throughout your life in order to maintain your sobriety and your mental health.
aha. So for all the skill set people out there, this is a personal development thing, because
Yep.
you don't get good at being sober. You develop your sobriety over and over again.
Well, you develop it and you foster it and you maintain it. Your sobriety is like anything, you have to feed it. You can either feed your addiction, because we always say there's a little monkey on my shoulder
Sure.
that's screaming in my ear, Jennifer, you're not sleeping good. You should take something. Jennifer, these people are pissing you off. Have a cocktail. So there's always that little addiction gremlin or monkey that's sitting on your shoulder. And if you don't maintain your attitude of gratitude and you don't
Oh,
look at yourself and say, I'm too tired, angry, hungry, lonely, and tired, those are killers. If you are any of those, if you are all those things at one time, you have a greater chance of slipping and drinking or using again. Because at our base, we want to stop whatever pain's going on, whether it's psychological or physical. That's why when I have surgeries, I'm careful. If I have surgery in the hospital, I don't take a lot of painkillers home with me,
oh,
because it's a really slippery
sure.
slope. Um, so you have to work these steps all the time.
All the time. So AA is done. The accountability piece, we've recognized that you need other people,
Mhm.
but really this is something that individually you're doing constantly, and maintaining and developing. But then you have the fellowship piece. Okay.
If you have a good fellowship and you have a group you go to all the time, those people in that meeting, the ones who are working the program, will notice if you're off balance. It's kind of like your friends notice if you're off balance. These are just friends who have skills to get you back on the beam, that aren't paid to get you back on the beam.
Right. And you don't have to get back on the beam.
Right. Yeah. And there's nothing that says you have to get it back on the beam. You can tell them,
Yeah.
as we say in New York, have at it, trying to be nice, but yeah.
There was a movie years ago. Well, it wasn't that long ago. It was probably like 10 years ago. But the man who was dying was a drug addict.
Hmm.
And he was trying to he could no longer go out of the apartment. He wasn't physically capable of leaving the apartment. Um, and his daughter then went and got his drugs. I don't remember what type of drug it was for him. And the
Yeah.
rest
Love
of
it.
the family were,
We, we, we call that loving them to death.
the movie has challenged me over the years. Like, what would I do in that? It was his life, but he's no longer able to get it. Because usually when we want to help so much, we want to help. We just want to take over and take control. It would have been helpful. I'm sure many family members would have been able to just say, oh, let's just remove all the alcohol from Jennifer's life, and then she can't drink anymore.
They could have tried.
Right. And then,
But that's why we have Alcoholics Anonymous and um, other organizations that parrot Alcoholics Anonymous, but for the family.
mm,
So that teaches our family, their actions have consequences too. So if you've decided that you're going to enable me and bring me booze, now we have DoorDash, although I don't know they can DoorDash drugs, but I suppose. Uh,
depends on what state you're in, maybe. I don't
you
know.
know, so uh, that portion of that teaches the family that
Mhm.
you need to understand what you're doing is not helping. And that group gives them the strength to call somebody and say, somebody just called me and they need me to bring them a fifth because, they're starting to have delusions. Well, instead of bringing them a fifth, maybe you need to send them an ambulance. So, they're two separate groups, but they work in tandem together because all of us people who have addictions have families. And we may not have families forever because at a certain point they will just write us off.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they, even if they remove themselves from our lives, our behavior is still affecting them.
Yeah.
Alcoholics Anonymous and, you know, I forget what the other one's called because I'm not in it.
NA, Narcotics Anonymous.
No, the parent,
Oh.
the family organization for Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh.
Al-Anon. I'm sorry, Al-Anon.
Okay.
Al-Anon teaches our families how to deal with our addiction and how gives them a support group that keeps them from continuing to enable us, or as we like to say, loving us to death. You know,
Yeah.
bringing us to wet houses or getting our drugs for us. I mean, anybody who's ever watched the show on cable, Intervention,
Mm.
you want to know about addiction, watch that show
Oh.
because it is a very stark reality of how both sides experience addiction and the the cruelty of
Mm.
it, because it's not, addiction is not kind. Your addiction is not looking to be your friend. Your addiction is looking to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah. And change can be ugly and difficult too.
And the whiplash that our families get when,
Yes.
when we get sober and then we fall off the wagon, then we get sober and we fall off the wagon. So that hope, and then that letdown is substantial for our family members.
Yeah.
It takes a toll on them and they start exhibiting behaviors that aren't great, you know.
Well, there.
It's being as sober as long as I've been sober, I've had
Mhm.
people say, you're too far from your addiction to understand. I'm well, like, okay, then let me go to an AA meeting and spend 40 minutes telling you my story. And I can tell you I'm never that far away from it. But that swirls us into the terminal uniqueness of addiction. Everybody who's wickedly into their addiction, whatever it is the you don't understand, you don't get it. I'm this way because we call it terminal uniqueness because we believe in our disease that nobody understands us. Nobody's experiencing what we're experiencing. And we're like, dude, yeah, we do. Been there, done that, got the t shirt. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, but early on, they don't want to hear that. You have to tell them your story and hope they latch onto something
Yeah.
that is similar to theirs. And then they ask the question, well, how did you get past that? And that's what, yeah, a general open to the public A meeting is about, is people like me telling our stories from beginning to end, from despair to victory. Those are the kind of things that pull people in. And I say this when, in church all the time. And I am a Christian. I'm born again, baptized, the whole 9 yards.
Uh-huh.
And I say, look, you can't drag someone to God. They have to follow you. They have to follow you to their faith. Dragging them kicking and screaming is not going to do them anything other than making them pissed off at you and God. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
because people tried to drag me there and it just made me angry. So, and
You worked it. You worked and you continued to work it. If someone um, did have someone that they were concerned about having an alcohol problem, what would be something that you would advise that person to do?
that's a really hard question because I
Mm.
think everybody's situation is different. It really
Mm.
depends on at what stage you're asking. If you're talking about a teenager who got drunk for the first time, or you're
Mm.
talking about a 50-year-old somebody who is, having seizures on the ground because they couldn't get in, because they're trying to quit. And in that moment, you realize, okay, they're having seizures because they're not drinking. I think there's a variable there.
Sure.
Um,
The
I had a
seizure guy
conversation,
is going to eat an emergency.
right.
Okay.
I had a I felt like I needed to have a conversation with my daughter, who's now 28. She's gonna be 29. I
Mm.
had to, when she was a teenager, I had to have a sit down conversation with her because there are it's believed that there's a certain amount of heredity to
Mhm.
addiction.
Yeah.
And my family's got a history of, nominal biblical, might say, proportions.
Mhm.
So I said, look, you're a teenager and I know you're going to try this. As much as I love Nancy Reagan, just say no doesn't work. It never really did.
Right.
Okay. We hoped, like the tooth fairy, that just say no would work. There's too many outside pressures for teenagers to try stuff. So I felt it was important that I say, look, your family's got this history. I've got this history.
Mhm.
You're walking, you're almost walking a plank when you're trying these things. So you
Mm.
need to, here's the information I'm telling you. You're going to have to make a decision. I'm here to help you, but understand that if you jump on this wagon, it may move so fast you can't jump off. And
Mm.
I don't want that for you. That being said, if you
Mm.
get on that wagon and you realize it, I'm here to help you. I may not be able to help you directly because I'm your mother, but I know people. I can take you to places to get help. I did not get sober in treatment. Didn't happen. Well, it did by virtue of the fact that I was in a facility. Um,
But
but
once you
once I left, I had to work the program in order to get sober. So going to treatment 85 times, it doesn't matter how many times you go to treatment. If you're not at the point where you're willing to do anything to stay alive, treatment is just a spin cycle where, you know, you don't feel like crap for 30
Mhm.
days. But if you don't put tools in place to deal with everything that's associated with why you've done this,
Mhm.
you're going to be in treatment 25 times.
Yeah.
And then treatment is expensive.
Treatment's expensive. There's a spiritual component to addiction, there's a biological component to addiction, and then there's a psychological component to addiction. There is not any part of us that escapes addiction.
Nope.
The part that I find that doesn't necessarily will give you the most hope is that spiritual piece, but that's the one that's probably the most difficult, because then you have
Yes.
to do that self-examination piece, like who
Mhm.
am I, what is my purpose in this world. And
There I think there's also a component too, is that for me, it was, do I deserve forgiveness? A talks a lot about getting to a point where, you make a list of the people you have harmed, you have a
mhm,
conversation with your sponsor. The fifth step is admitting to all the things you've done. It's supposed to be, and it doesn't feel like it at the time, but it's supposed to be very and I want to make sure I'm using the right word because we're on a podcast, but cathartic. You're supposed to go, okay, I went through my whole list of people I'd harmed. I voiced them out loud. It makes them real. They're not, and then being able to accept forgiveness from your higher power. And again, for me, that's God.
mhm,
So being able to, it was really big for me, honestly, was really believing that God could forgive Jennifer,
mhm,
that I was worthy of
mhm,
that forgiveness.
mhm,
Um, because I didn't think I was. I thought I was the original badass, which most
mhm,
people would just laugh about that because, you know, there's a lot of things in my addiction I didn't do. There was a great many things I did do, but
mhm,
I can tell you no one's looking at me for murder charges or,
mhm.
any of that really non take backable stuff.
Right.
But I thought so little of me at the time that I couldn't get my head around. I mean, I was just getting my head around that God was a thing. Never mind getting my head around that somebody who created all things could forgive me. Am I worthy?
Yeah.
So there's that component. If you can't get your head around the fact that um, God forgives us simply because we ask, that's a hard thing to get your head around, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And can come back at you too.
Right. And, so once I got to that point where I thought, well, maybe, you start off, okay, maybe you're not as bad as you thought you were.
Right.
Maybe God can forgive this little block of things, but it's probably won't forget. So
A
it's steps
progressive.
for a
Mhm.
reason. It's tiers. Some people work a set of, amends. You start with the really easy ones, like I called you a jerk. Okay,
Mhm.
that's easy. Kelley, I'm sorry I called you a jerk.
Right.
And then there's the big ones, like I punched my sister in the face. That's a big one, right? Not that I ever did that, just for the record.
Yeah.
But so sometimes you have to start with the easy things. And when people say, you know what, it's okay. I know you're struggling. Um, let's try not to do that again.
I
Um,
I I appreciated AA's steps in that when you're making amends, it's not always necessary and maybe even helpful to make amends with the person. There might be circumstances outside of your control, or maybe if you were to go tell that person, it might not be a good thing.
well,
Um,
yeah, you don't want to do more damage with your amends by making the amends.
right.
So you don't want to, like, let's say you're married or someone you're with is married. You're not going to go up to that someone's other half and say, I want to apologize for having an affair, because if she doesn't know or he doesn't know, that's causing more damage. And then you got another amends to make, and you go, oh, well, you didn't know that. I probably shouldn't have said anything because now I'm doing more harm than good.
So you have to have um, some discernment when you're making your amends.
And that's what your sponsor's for. Because
Oh,
if you look in the AA book and the AA literature, there's a whole worksheet that you can do that says, is this something that's going to cause more damage if you go to this person? But
oh,
I think the bigger thing for me was that you also have to remember that when you're making amends, people don't have to accept them.
right,
You're cleaning up your side of the street. You say, "Look, Kelley, I'm sorry I called you a jerk," and you say, "Well, Jennifer, I'm not talking to you. You're
right.
you're a bad person," and
Yeah,
I would have to be okay with that. I'd be like,
yeah,
you know what? I attempted to clean up my side of the street. If you're not willing to take that amends, I have to accept that you're not willing to take that amends, and then I have to know what to do with that. I can't create another resentment because, oh, now Kelley won't take my amends. What kind of person? It's a whole balancing act.
right. Or I'm stuck here until Kelley forgives me because she has to forgive me.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, you can't do that because you get stuck. And if you get stuck, if you're not making forward progress and you get stuck, you're falling behind.
Yeah, you're cleaning up yourself. Do you remember the Serenity Prayer?
I do.
The Serenity Prayer. I honestly thought that all of us should learn it very early on in life.
But you know what? And there's two, right? There's the hardcore Christian serenity prayer, and then
Oh,
there's the AA serenity prayer.
did not know that. What's the
Yes.
difference?
Well, I tell you what, you say what it is, and I'll tell you.
Oh, so Lord, give me the wisdom. Oh, shoot.
God grant me this
Wisdom
serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the
to know the
difference.
difference.
Hmm.
That to me would be the Serenity Prayer.
Yeah.
That's, is there another one?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that was the other one is the what we do at close of AA meetings, and
Oh,
I
okay.
can't remember what that one is right off the top of my head. And what's funny is when I can't sleep at night, those are the two things I use repetitively. So if I say them often enough,
Yeah.
hopefully I'll go to sleep. I used to read like Genesis to go to sleep because Lord knows,
That's a good.
all those generations of whose dad is mom yeah, that used to work.
The begatting of begatting. Whatever will help. Whatever will help.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Do you
Oh,
have
I remember now. Our Father who art in heaven.
Oh,
Um,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will
right.
be
In
done. Yep.
AA, it's a little different because we try to take we don't want to be too biblical.
It's the Lord's Prayer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we
It's
tweak it a little so it's not completely Christian based. Although the Oxford group is where AA originally came out of. So
um in both of them and in AA, there's always the understanding that there are other people or other things that are involved in this decision making process of who you are.
hmm
And so the 12 steps is in the relationship with your mind and your process and your development.
hmm
And then mantras, going through these things. Um, what you give yourself to is what you become. And so if you choose to practice piano, well, then you're going to become a pianist. The quality of the pianist is up to your ability, your skill level, which you might not have control over. But I've always appreciated the wisdom that is we do have ability and control over what we choose to become.
Well, and I
And
think that that comes with a lot of cognitive therapy, right?
yeah,
Because I had to do all that stuff too.
see,
Is if you're 100% negative in that therapy, they teach you how to change a negative to a positive and
right.
rework the message in your head. Because alcoholics and addicts, we carry if we're not working the program, we carry luggage. And it's all our resentments, everything that's happened to me, everything I've done to other people. And if you carry that around like luggage, you get tired. And all of a sudden, you'll trip over it and your baggage will come all out and you'll be not nice to people and you risk getting drunk or high
On the
again.
outside sometimes.
So you have to learn to get rid of your baggage and leave it behind. And,
Yeah.
I had to learn to stop apologizing over and over again. Once I've done my amends and you get to
Mm,
choose whether you accept it, but I'm not going to continue to apologize for it.
right.
I'm
You
just not
hurt
going to
me.
do it.
It's your choice to decide if you're going to do it or not.
You could either be in my life and accept or not be in my life but I'm not going to let you continue to beat me up.
Right. If someone was considering sobriety, where would they go?
In this day and age, it's easy because you can go and Google Alcoholics Anonymous, and they can find meetings in your area by zip code, by city, by types of
Oh,
meetings. Whether you want a big book meeting, whether you want a general open meeting, whether you want a 12-step meeting, there's a lot of variations of it.
okay.
Back in the day, I was known as a big book thumper. In other words, the big book was for me
Uh-huh.
second only to the Bible,
Uh-huh.
how I ran my life and what I did.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's just 12 step groups who are designed to spend that hour focusing on, okay, today we're working on step one. Admitting we were powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. And you talk about that. And so there's different demographics of meetings, A meetings for older people, A meetings for nationality, Hispanic or whatever, language base, whatever you want. For me, if they're working out of the big book and they're working out of the 12 traditions, you're in the right place. Um, and sometimes it's like anything, you have to go to several different locations to find where you fit. You're not always going to fit in certain types of meetings. Like, I do not speak Spanish, Kelley. I could not sit in an AA meeting because I wouldn't understand the word the
Sure.
people in that meeting were saying.
Right.
There are meetings for just women. There are meetings for just men. There's meetings for, transgender or LGBTQ you have to go around and find the right meeting and then you have to settle into it. Find somebody who will be your sponsor, help you work the steps and early in sobriety, keep you out of jail and keep you creating more amends that you're trying to fix. Um, but we're in an age now where there's no reason you shouldn't be able to find a meeting or several.
And
Even AA has Al-Anon clubs where there's buildings 100% dedicated to Alcoholics Anonymous, where
oh,
they have all their meetings, they have dances, they help you teach you how to have fun without alcohol and drugs. And, you know, it's recovery can be a lifestyle of its own
and
if you're
so
working it correctly.
it just, to me, it sounds like AA might be one of the most welcoming groups ever.
It can be, but
It can be.
please remember that
Uh-huh.
there are sick people in AA. It's like
There,
anything else.
yep,
Okay. One of the things we always say is take what you need and leave the rest.
and leave the
You're
rest.
not going to agree with everything coming out of my mouth or,
Sure.
or how I got here. But the kicker is that you're here and you're listening and you're taking bits that will help you. And if you don't think it's helping you, leave it alone.
Oh,
you don't,
you
this
don't have to
is
eat the whole
one,
sandwich.
right. It's 100% voluntary. You can choose to get better or you can choose to stay sick.
It's your life, and you get to choose which way you're going to live it.
Right back to consequences.
Right back to consequences. But we would hope that you would want to become sober, because
I don't
there's,
know. You know what? I would hope that people understand that not being addicted and letting a, a substance or a habit or a practice um, keep you from living your complete life. Addiction keeps you from living a happy, joyous, and free life. That's what it does. It keeps you oppressed, it keeps you miserable, and it keeps you alone. And color me silly, but sounds like that's what the devil wants. He wants us to be alone. He wants us to be miserable. He wants us to not have people around us.
right,
Um, and
right.
so,
And we
yeah,
are biologically communal beings.
we are
We're
herd people.
we are herd people. Yes.
As
So
much as
whatever
we all say we don't like people, and Kelley has heard me say that a lot, uh,
we
you know,
want to be loved.
we
We
want
want
to,
to
and we want to be accepted, right? You
we
know,
want to be accepted. Yep.
yeah. And
And
it's
so we want to be loved, and we want to love in return. Can't get away from that.
no, you can't. Let me
No.
just say, when I was early in sobriety, I got this pocket held big book.
Mhm.
It's got the first 164 pages, which is the meat and bones of AA and its recovery. And my
Uh-huh.
sponsor at the time wrote in the cover of it, she wrote,
Uh-huh.
Serenity is the result of faithful, trusting acceptance of God's will. Parentheses, not Jennifer's bright ideas and assumptions, even in the midst of difficulties. I've had this book for 28 years, and it's got all kinds of highlighted areas in it. But
Mm,
those are the gifts that you get
yeah.
if you get into AA and you get with good people who are working the program. Um, you can have a happy and joyous, free life. Um, Not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a sight better than being miserable.
Well, I'm glad that you are a part of AA, and you shared um, your journey, some of your journey with us. And I know you hope, as well as I hope, that the people that are listening, if alcohol is something that you have realized um, that is in control of you, that you would seek out an AA group, the AA group that works best for you. And I also know that you can message us, and we will get you connected up. And so thanks for listening. We both wish you well.